Manchester, did some of his art education in Belfast. He developed a work of art which was about creating communities of shared interest. One of his enthusiasms as a teenager was the Manchester band The Smiths, and he found in travelling the world huge amounts of excitement and devotion to this particular band that he felt were really all about his own cultural background, but yet people all around the world seem to take to them in particular ways. And Phil set up a series of karaoke's which have people from Indonesia, from Turkey, from Colombia, singing Smith songs. And these really are extraordinary films of people singing their hearts out to these songs that they adore. And the other film which we see on the right is by Philippe Moreno, which, as I mentioned, is called The Boy from Mars. And this is a film set in rural Thailand, in a place where Moreno and a number of other artists worked on a land reclamation project and set up a series of artist residencies, and it was a kind of environmental and art venture. What results in terms of this as an artwork is something which is both a film and a land work. Part of the reason we're flagging both of these works is that on the one hand, Phil Collins' work deals with popular culture, and it also deals with global affiliations and networks. It also deals with the moving image and with forms of making and production. It involves filming, but also involves people performing. And Philippe Moreno's work involves film again, but it also involves working on the land. It thinks about ecological conditions and real circumstances of being in a particular place at a particular time. It involves representing and also making that place. So in each of these cases, we can think maybe that amongst the multiplicity of contemporary art and amongst the plural questions about what the contemporary might mean, we find these artists doing things which are on the one hand traditional. Phil Collins' work is in a way a kind of portraiture, and Philippe Moreno's work is in a way a kind of landscape work. Two of the most prominent of genres of art making that we would all be familiar with. But these are also works which crucially ask questions about relationships between people, about how we live with each other, under what conditions. And they place an emphasis then on participation. And this is one of the things that we might think of as an important category or area of inquiry within contemporary art. The way in which we come together in particular ways to take part in or co-produce or enjoy artworks. So they also have relationships to place then, to particular locales. And we can get a sense in a great deal of contemporary art of an interest in specific sites and in the setting up of situations that relate to certain kinds of definite places in the world. They also then have relationships with other cultural forms. Art itself is often not necessarily one particular thing, as I've identified. It's plural, it's a multiple thing. But it also is about the exploration of multiple mediums, about contact with other ways of making associated with other forms of culture. So to kind of race through quickly then a number of examples that pertain to these ideas of participation, of site and situation, of the exploration of multiple media. I have mediums here rather than media, by the way, because this is the way this is often referred to within certain art theoretical debates for reasons that no one needs to get into, I think. So we might take with regard to the question of participation, something like Karsten Holler's work for the Tate Modern Unilever commissions, the test site, where again we see something which is framed explicitly in terms of being a testing of something. In this case, it's a testing of the relationship, the conventional relationship with an our relationship with an artwork in a museum. What is it we do when we come into contact with an artwork? In this case, what we do is we zoom through a kind of helter-skelter slide or series of slides within a museum. We don't have a detached relationship with the work. We enter into the work and speed through it. So it's about our bodies as well as our points of view. But it might also be about what a questioning of what happens in museums now, or what are museums for? Are they playgrounds? Are they, fairgrounds? Are they leisure centres? As much as places of serious reflection. So there might be any number of ways we could think that the activation of our of new kinds of behaviour in the audience might be considered here. Similarly, another Tate Modern commission, the Oliver Eliason's The Weather Project, encourages different atmospheres within which to encounter art. So with dry ice and with a huge sodium sun and a vast ceiling mirror that greatly exaggerates the sense of scale within the space and creates, as I say, an alternate atmosphere for encountering art. Different forms of behaviour might become possible. So people in this instance start to lie down on the floor. They start to do different kinds of things. Apparently, as I said, the students in the room will be aware of this. I'm always mentioning these kinds of things, that they, lots of people got very intimate on the floor, for instance, in this particular artwork, which doesn't normally happen on the floors of a museum. Take a little walk around them afterwards, and I guarantee you that if you lie down on the floor with your loved one, questions will be asked by the invigilators, I would suspect. But go for it. That's my but it is about this creating of alternative conditions for the encounter with art and with each other. So these works then we can also suggest might relate to a notion of site specificity. If they're things that are about the activation of the audience member in different ways, of changing our behaviour, they might also be about making us reflect on a particular place and the way in which art exists in that place. And a number of other artists have made works which are definitively about that. They're about how art occupies the world. So in this instance, in this somewhat shabby looking construction here by the artist Thomas Hirschhorn, this was a monument to the surrealist writer, artist Georges Bataille, which was set up in a suburb of Kassel in Germany during the major art event Documenta 11. In this instance, this is something where an artist who relishes working with very basic materials, very unintimidating materials, but creates a monument to a thinker of great complexity and ambition and daring. This is something which has become a meeting point, a connection point for people within that community. So it's a kind of high art or high philosophy idea, made accessible in particular ways. Or we have a work by Francis Alise, such as When Fate Moves Mountain in 2002, where he was gathering together a large group of people to move a massive sand dune by a tiny amount in the outskirts of Lima in Peru. This again was, a form of making work in the land, making a line in the sand, literally, but also about creating an experience for people within that situation, a sort of pointless activity. They attempt to move a mountain, but that might also produce in that place a particular kind of story. This work is, apart from anything else, a kind of drawing, but drawing that is also about drawing relationships between people as well as drawing a mark in the landscape. Other works like this, which involve the coming together of people, and the coming together of different forms of art, different forms of image making, have been sometimes called relational aesthetics. And we get in an instance like this, an artwork which involves something very traditional. It involves an image. It's, the image is in fact Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, but it's in the form of a jigsaw. And exhibition visitors in this instance had to come in and collaboratively make the jigsaw. So, together they come and try and piece together an image of revolutionary freedom. So these forms of work then relate to things, very traditional things in some ways, but in perhaps non-traditional or more contemporary ways. They relate to notions of public monument making, or the creation of public meeting places, to landscape and land art, and to things like painting and image making. What is our relationship to images individually and collectively? In relation to painting, which has been so important, I'll try and wrap up now actually, but painting, it's been so important as a form. It's the relationship between images which is often defining in terms of how we understand or value them. How painting might situate itself as a contemporary form in relation to other contemporary forms. So Jörg Kaiser says, as everyone knows, there's no shortage of pictures on the internet, on flat screens, on mega posters, on mobile phones, and in all the countless illustrated volumes at your local bookstore. Painting must compete with this mass media image pool, whether or not it actively addresses it. At the same time, painting must compete with itself, with its own history, which in turn is part of this image pool. So can painting not just act innocent, as if it had just been discovered as a novel way of applying colourful wet stuff to a surface and letting it dry? Sure it can. But then it must expect to be perceived as decoration, as flatly commercial, or as the work of an amateur. All these are nonetheless qualities which intelligent painting can embrace, as long as it does so deliberately. So the things prioritised here in some way are the relationship between image forms, a consciousness of the place of art in relation to other forms of images that fill our lives, and also a certain kind of intelligence and deliberation. So we get works like this, for instance, by the acclaimed painter Luc Tuymans, where we get an image of Condoleezza Rice close up. It's as much about the relationship between another image as it is with our relationship with this image. Or we get the work of someone like the Swedish painter Karin Mama Andersson, who in certain instances will make images that are about our experience of engaging with art. So in this work we have monitors on plinths supported in front of what may be an open space, or it may be a painted wallpaper. There's a layering of images here, and a creation of multiple spaces, multiple different worlds to enter into. This is one of the ones that didn't appear for frustrating reasons. And the German artist Thomas Abst, who won the Turner Prize a few years ago, she doesn't have works with tiny pieces of text in them in the middle, but I'm sure you'll find painters today who have that. But Gillian Carnegie, for instance, who's is another artist, I guess, who we can think of in terms of, in ways quite closely related to, say, for instance, Francis's Manet examples, where we have here a black square, which relates to the black square of Malevich in the early part of the 20th century, a radical gesture of emptying painting out of content. But in this instance, her black square is also includes a forest landscape. So two different, incompatible ways of thinking about art are brought together. But a third dimension is added insofar as she'll also include smaller images of her own reader, let's say. So the kind of lofty art historical reflections that are involved within a work like this is also coupled by something which is deflationary, which almost has a kind of comic undercutting of the art historical dimension of the other work. Other forms of work, and I'll go through these very quickly, are today very much about the way in which images within our culture are after images. That how do we picture the present? So in works such as this by Thomas Ruff, he takes JPEGs from the internet and turns these into gigantic museum scale images. The minor things that fragment as they circulate around the world, that disintegrate and lessen in quality as they're exchanged by people around the globe, become for him monumental history paintings. Things that are, the ways in which we see the world today become monumentalized in his works. Or we get someone like the Irish artist Gerard Byrne, who creates new tense awkward dramas out of already existing texts. So pulling on the archive of the existent and turning it into new kinds of reflections on lost possibility. Or the artist Pierre Huyghe, for instance, who, along with the other artists I mentioned before, Philippe Perreno, bought a character from a Japanese manga cartoon, and the two of them took this forgotten, marginalized character who had no further role to play in any of these Japanese cartoons, buying the rights to her. They gave new life to her in a series of different artworks, including this one. And then we get someone as well like the artist Simon Starling, who whose work will often involve the remaking, recycling, transformation of the already existent. So in this, kind of extraordinary work, he takes a Charles Eames aluminium group chair, and he remakes that using the metal from a Marin Sausalito bicycle. So he has two iconic pieces of 20th century design. But he also takes a Marin Sausalito bicycle, and he also makes a Marin Sausalito bicycle using the metal from a Charles Eames aluminium group chair. So each of these things are made from the original of the other thing. And then there were various works by Isaac Enskine which have also disappeared. For some reason it's all the women that disappeared, so apologies again about that. It's a little bit like my life, she says it from the camera. The women always disappear.
The object test of doubtful rejection is equivocal objects. Tentative rejection is brilliant.
So it kind of works that the images disappear as quickly as they appear, which is a kind of contemporary art, idea inadvertently. But that's I suppose that's the point to conclude on, really. I'll skip that, and I'll just give you this little note from the curator, Richard Flood, curator of the New Museum in New York. He says that our time, and this was related to Isaac Enskine, so perhaps we can pull our works up in just a moment, that our time demands the anti-masterpiece. Things that are cobbled together, pushed and prodded into a state of suspended animation feel right. Stubby, brutish forms that know something of the world in which they are made tell the contemporary story. Works that appear hurled into uncomfortable, anxious relationships run parallel to life. Remember the Duchamp and the people hurrying and accumulating in image forms as they move downstairs. That's modern life there. In this instance, Flood is saying, works that appear hurled into uncomfortable, anxious relationships run parallel to life. That's the kind of work that's appropriate to our contemporary work. Objects with knots of nerve endings reaching out to find a brain mirror the fugue states of everyday consciousness. The world is beset by volatility. Objects that suggest something akin to an honest response to life help frame the questions that animate the culture. So a contemporary art will have these kinds of contemporary conditions, contemporary effects. I think that's all I have to say. Maybe we can pull up the Isaac Enskine images, which related to these final comments, as we have some further conversation. Thank you for your time. So this is an image by Isaac Enskine. Whoop. That was me falling off.
It's interesting going back to this actually, because we're thinking about this together, and it relates to the thing we teach, I suppose. I'm trying to find, as I said at the beginning, some sort of coordinates for thinking about a definition of modernism in art that would have a contemporary resonance, sort of coordinates to fit it around. And so within modernism it becomes thought of as an expression of modernity. And the point to that being is that there can be different expressions of modernity in different times, but also in different mediums and in different forms. So this allows you to sort of uncouple thinking about modernism from sort of canonical ideas of modernism. It's not only Cubism, for example. There may be different forms of modernism to be found in popular culture. Pulp modernism, some of the people talk about science fiction novels, for example, writings of H.P. Lovecraft, things such as this, or food, even though there would be like modernism in food. There could be different modernisms in different forms, but also there would be different modernism in different places. South American modernism, for example, has been something that's been very interesting. And that there will be different modernisms in different times, so different experiences of modernity, times and places in different ways, which is a roundabout way of saying this would be a way of thinking about the contemporary in relationship to previous iterations of modernism, because those contemporary forms that Declan went through are also finding forms for expressing contemporary modernism. And in finding those kind of contemporary forms, then we came up with these 4 ideas that seem to be those things around which contemporary art cohere, which Declan mentioned: participation, participatory forms of collectivity and participation, community, collaboration; and sight, those works which respond in some sense to particular sites, particular places; and then medium, works which respond to the medium within which they come in here, and question medium, question painting, question sculpture, question stuff, whatever that stuff is, question the galleries medium. And we had those 3, and those seem all kind of really comfortable and good. But then there was a 4th one, which was the cinematic, which didn't really talk about so much today.
No, I guess one of the reasons I didn't talk about the cinematic so much was because I felt that we could touch on it in relation to the ideas about medium, but also I felt that it would be ideal to be able to show clips. I didn't think we would really have time, but certainly this notion of the cinematic, which might incorporate the photographic as well, is really, I suppose, about thinking about the relationship of art to moving images in multiple ways, and the relationship to the way in which we consume cinematic images. It's almost impossible for art to separate itself out entirely from that field of really powerful image making, which really dominates the visual field in lots of ways. There's a great number of artists whose work is about the creation of certain kinds of spaces that we enter into to observe, often very long and very slow films, and that they are clearly, for these artists, set up in a way to be not like ordinary filmmaking. And this is often one of the most difficult things about contemporary artists, to think about the difference between art filmmaking and film filming. And perhaps some of you have views on that from your own experiences of seeing film art in galleries. Certainly video and film dominate contemporary art in very significant ways. I remember a review of I think the Venice Biennale a number of years ago in the Art Monthly magazine. It was entitled "Death by Video." That going to some of these large-scale exhibitions involves sometimes the torture of having to sit through inhuman hours of films and videos. That is almost impossible for people to take in all of these films which feature these large-scale exhibitions. And this is just to give a sense of the extent to which the moving image can often dominate, can often be dominant in encounter with contemporary art. But I wonder, would it be okay to invite a few?
Absolutely, we're
questions?
up to 1 o'clock, so 10 minutes. If people just have questions, please hear from you.
There's one at the front here. Yes.
We're having an exhibition now, gallery, very soon by Geraint Gripper. It's an installation piece, and it's being in response to the building. But what I want to ask is, like, the problem we have with audiences when they come in, some of these things, they kind of come in and turn around and go out and say, oh. But then when we have children, they really respond, really well. It doesn't matter. But we've had cinematic things as well, and they love those also. But I'm just wondering, like, what we can say to these audiences when they come in to try and explain a little bit better what they're looking at, or why they shouldn't just turn around and go out.
It's very hard, isn't it?
It is.
In the early part of the 20th century, Walter Benjamin was writing about Charlie Chaplin films, and he was saying that the mass audience response to Charlie Chaplin's films was a radical response. You know, but you know, the same audience that was seeing these radical new forms of filmmaking wouldn't really be able to have a radical response to forms of high art. You know, and so it's really, and I think it's a Hal Foster in Return of the Real says about going to see an exhibition of minimalist artwork and really only getting minimalism whenever he notices children jumping around the beams and walking along the beams in the exhibition space, that they know it's all about your relationship with the body. But everyone else comes into the space expecting something else because you're so informed, you're so, you know, you have such prejudices that you carry with you. So what do you say to people? I mean, I think you can, if the work is any good, I guess you can make a case for the detail in the work, the extent to which the artists have taken great care to imagine a relationship with that space.
And sometimes in these exhibitions, the actual craftsmanship or work is not the important thing either. Sometimes, no, I'm not saying this will be like that, but we've had sometimes where you look at them and say, I know they can make it, it's better than that. They're not just doing it on purpose now.
Yeah.
And that's hard to defend as well.
Yeah. Well, it is very difficult because you do want people to be able to have faith in you that what you're putting out there is something which is credible and worth their time and attention. But it's often difficult to encourage people to put their prejudices to the side and pay attention and take time. Any thoughts? Chris, can I help you win?
And certainly if people are there, like that's already, that's already something. Right? I mean, I think it's sometimes interesting to ask people who are dismissive of anything as to whether that dismissal is itself interesting. Like, I think, this might just be me, but like, I could sometimes find being bored or being upset or disgusted or dismissive, like an almost endlessly fascinating experience of life. Well, why is that the case? And I think that why then becomes the interesting question to ask. Because if you've got somebody engaging and then hating, right? Or there's still an interaction and engagement going on, and then it's the kind of the why question becomes a very kind of interesting one to then unpack. Because like just saying something rubbish and then walking away like that seems to be not interesting in itself. Sort of a further interrogation as to why it's bad. Because a lot of work, well, maybe a lot of work I like, coming out of kind of postmodernism, is to a certain extent predicated on or finds meaning in its failure. So that makes it interesting. A failure of representation, a failure of aesthetics, a failure of, any numbers of kind of failure, which, that can be really, really interesting.